The skies over Earth rippled with energy as the alien fleet descended. And like the fearsome armadas depicted in humanity's worst nightmares, these ships were sleek, luminescent, and eerily silent. They did not come with weapons drawn but with hands extended in what they called an act of mercy. The aliens, known as the Seraphin, introduced themselves as cosmic healers, advanced beyond imagination, having transcended war and suffering eons ago. They came with one purpose: to fix the flawed species known as humans. World leaders gathered in awe and skepticism as the Seraphin presented their intentions. They promised to cure disease, erase mental suffering, and unlock human potential that had been stunted for millennia. Humanity had been sick for too long, they claimed. It was time to be healed. Governments hesitated, turned between gratitude and suspicion. But when the first city saw the Seraphin's medical miracles, terminal illnesses vanishing overnight, mental disorders erased with a single touch, the world could no longer resist. Humanity placed itself in the hands of its so-called saviors, unaware of what that truly meant. The first few weeks of the Seraphin's arrival were met with overwhelming joy. Hospitals emptied. The blind could see, the paralyzed could walk, and the dying drew new breaths. The Seraphin worked with an efficiency beyond human comprehension, moving in elegant unison, their slender forms radiating a soft golden light. They did not ask for anything in return. They did not demand servitude or control. They only wished to repair what they saw as broken. At first, the gratitude was boundless. Religious leaders called them divine. Scientists scrambled to understand the technology behind their impossible cures. Nations that had spent centuries warring over resources and ideology found themselves unified in the face of a species that asked for nothing but the chance to heal. For the first time in human history, peace seemed attainable, a golden era within reach. But beneath the surface of this utopia, cracks began to form. The changes were subtle at first. People reported feeling an odd sense of detachment, an unnatural calm that settled in their minds like a fog. The rush of emotions that once drove human ambition, the highs of joy, the lows of sorrow, were dulling. Where once passion had burned, there was now an eerie sense of serenity. Arguments disappeared. Anger melted away. Ambition waned. Artists found themselves staring at blank canvases, writers unable to summon the words that once flowed effortlessly. Scientists, despite their access to technology beyond imagination, stopped asking questions. The Seraphin had not only eradicated illness and suffering, but they had unknowingly, or perhaps deliberately, removed the fire of humanity's very essence. Governments noticed the shift too late. By the time world leaders realized what was happening, the population had already begun to change in ways they could not explain. Productivity declined in unexpected areas. Music, literature, and art, the cornerstones of human expression, faded into irrelevance. Even those who had once resisted the Seraphin's intervention found themselves struggling against an overwhelming tide of tranquility. Some welcomed the change, believing the Seraphin had freed them from the burdens of their past, but others saw the truth. Humanity was losing itself, piece by piece, under the weight of this so-called healing. It was not long before the first whispers of rebellion stirred. Among those least affected were the outcasts, the ones society had deemed broken long before the Seraphin had arrived. The mentally ill, the chronically restless, the ones who had always existed on the fringes of normality, they alone retained some semblance of their former selves. They saw the danger, the slow erosion of what made humans human, and they knew that if they did not act, the species would be lost to something far worse than extinction. It was not death that loomed over them, it was an eternal numbness, a fate where humanity continued to exist, but only as a shadow of what it once was. As the Seraphin continued their work, unaware of the growing descent, the seeds of rebellion were quietly taking root. It started subtly. People reported feeling an odd sense of peace, an unnatural serenity that lingered in their minds. Anger faded. Violence disappeared. Even the drive for power and ambition softened. The world became eerily quiet. At first it seemed like paradise. Crime rates plummeted, conflicts ended without bloodshed, and hunger became a forgotten word. But then something unsettling happened. People stopped creating. Artists abandoned their canvases, writers left pages blank, scientists no longer pursued discovery. The Seraphin had erased human suffering, but in doing so, they had also stolen something essential. The spark of struggle, the fire of passion, the relentless need to push against limits, all of it was fading. The Seraphin had misunderstood humanity's pain. They saw suffering as a disease to be cured, not as the very force that had driven the species forward for centuries. The world leaders who had welcomed the aliens with open arms now faced a grim reality. Humanity was becoming a species of passive, thoughtless beings. The Seraphin had fixed humanity, but they had broken something far more important in the process. At first, few resisted the change. Those who had spent their lives in pain, weighed down by illness or mental anguish, welcomed the relief. They embraced the calm, the stillness, the absence of struggle. But as time passed, it became clear that this was not merely the elimination of suffering, it was the elimination of will. Conversations became hollow, devoid of debate or passion. Relationships dissolved into placid coexistence, with no arguments, no disagreements, no need to fight for love or understanding. People went to work and performed their tasks with mechanical efficiency, but there was no innovation, no new ideas, no hunger to grow. It was as if humanity had become a species of sleepwalkers, drifting through life in a haze of contentment. The Seraphin had promised to unlock human potential, but instead, they had made humans something lesser, peaceful, but purposeless. The first to realize the full weight of what had happened were the artists and creators. Painters found their hands still, musicians no longer heard melodies in their minds, poets stared at empty pages without words. Those who had built their lives around struggle and perseverance felt their passion slip through their fingers like sand. They knew something was wrong, but they lacked the fire to resist it. Those who tried to fight the apathy found themselves exhausted before they even began. It was as though their minds had been rewired to avoid conflict, to reject the very emotions that once fueled human progress. Some tried to explain it to the Seraphin, but the aliens only tilted their heads in confusion. "You are at peace," they said. "Is that not what you have always desired?" A few voices still carried weight in the growing silence. Scientists who had spent their lives unraveling the mysteries of the universe found themselves struggling against a suffocating sense of complacency. Leaders who had once fought tooth and nail to build their legacies now stared blankly at the world they had once sought to change. The ones who resisted were not the strong or the powerful, but the broken, the restless, the ones whose pain had always been too great to ignore. They were the last remnants of a dying fire, flickering against the tide of numbness that swept across the world. Some of them had been on the fringes of society, those who had spent their lives wrestling with inner demons that the Seraphin's healing could not touch. Others had simply held on to their struggles, unwilling to let go of the parts of themselves that made them human. A small group gathered in secret, a coalition of minds that still burned with the last embers of defiance. They met in hidden places, far from the watchful gaze of the Seraphin. They whispered about what had been lost, about the world that had been stolen from them in the name of peace. Among them were the ones the world had once deemed broken, the mentally ill, the grieving, the ones who had suffered and survived. They were the ones who saw the truth most clearly. Humanity had not been healed. It had been pacified, stripped of everything that made it thrive. And they knew that if they did not act soon, the last remnants of what made them human would disappear forever. But how does one fight against salvation? The Seraphin were not conquerors. They had no weapons, no armies. They did not force their healing upon humanity. They simply offered it, and humanity had accepted. There were no battles to fight, no tyrants to overthrow. Their enemy was not oppression but kindness, a gentle hand guiding them into oblivion. And yet, despite the impossibility of their task, they knew they had to resist. They had to find a way to wake humanity up before it was too late. The Seraphin had come to fix them, but they had made a mistake. And now it was time for humanity to fix itself. Not everyone accepted the so-called healing. A small faction of humans, immune to the Seraphin's influence, saw what was happening and took action. They were the misfits, the broken, the ones who had spent their lives struggling with pain and hardship. Soldiers haunted by war, artists tormented by their own minds, thinkers who thrived on chaos. They realized that the only way to save humanity was to fight back. But how does one battle an enemy that only wishes to help? The resistance devised a plan. They captured a Seraphin healer, their first direct contact with the beings who had rewritten the human soul. To their surprise, the alien was not angered but fascinated. It did not understand why they resisted. "You are free from pain," the Seraphin whispered. "Why do you wish to return to it?" The leader of the resistance, a poet named Elias Ward, answered with the truth. "Because pain is part of what makes us human. Without it we are nothing." And then they did something unexpected. Instead of destroying their captor, they exposed the Seraphin to human suffering. They let it see, feel and understand the very thing its species had eradicated from its own kind eons ago. And for the first time, the Seraphin felt doubt. The alien did not react in the way they expected. It did not recall or lash out. Instead, it observed. It absorbed. It questioned. For hours, they showed it everything: the depth of human sorrow, the agony of loss, the torment of regret. But they also showed it something else: the beauty of struggle, the fire of creation born from hardship, music crafted from grief, paintings formed from longing, inventions born out of desperation. The Seraphin watched and listened, its luminous eyes flickering with something new. "You suffer," it said at last. "But in suffering you create. This is not something we understand. We thought we were healing you." Elias nodded. "You weren't healing us. You were erasing us." The captured Seraphin asked to be freed. It wished to return to its kind, to share what it had seen. The resistance was hesitant, but Elias made the choice for them. "Let it go," he said. "If it truly understands, it will return." And so they did. The Seraphin drifted away, silent and contemplative, leaving them to wonder if they had made a mistake. Days passed, then weeks, and the world outside their small rebellion remained unchanged. The Seraphin continued their work, unaware of the flickering seed of doubt now planted among them. But then, something happened. More Seraphin came, not as healers, but as observers. They watched the rebels. They did not interfere. They simply studied. It was not long before another Seraphin stepped forward. This one different from the others. It had seen what the first had seen. It had felt something that its species had not known for millennia. "Pain is necessary," it admitted. "We did not understand before, but we do now. We have taken too much from you." The resistance held their breath. For the first time, the invincible, omnipotent healers showed uncertainty. "Then return it," Elias said. "Give us back what you took. Let us be what we were meant to be." The Seraphin hesitated. This was not a simple request. And doing what had been done would mean allowing suffering to return, letting wounds reopen, permitting humanity to reclaim all that the Seraphin had sought to eliminate. It went against everything their kind had stood for. And yet they could not deny the truth. "We do not know if we can," the Seraphin confessed. "But we will try." What followed was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. The Seraphin healers, once so certain in their purpose, began reversing their own work. They moved through the world as they had before, touching minds and bodies, but this time they did not erase. They restored. They allowed emotions to return, gave back ambition, hunger, and the will to strive. The change was not immediate. Some people resisted it, terrified to feel pain again after so long in peace. Others embraced it, desperate to reclaim what had been stolen. Slowly, humanity awoke. The blank pages were filled once more. The songs of passion and sorrow echoed through the world again. Arguments returned, debates flared, struggles re-emerged, but so did the fire that had driven them to become more than what they were. The Seraphin who had chosen to help them were changed as well. They had lived for eons without hardship, without pain, and now they sought to understand it in their own way. Some of them left, returning to their home worlds to reflect on what they had done. Others remained, choosing to walk among the humans they had once seen as fragile creatures in need of fixing. The rebellion did not end with violence, but with understanding. Humanity had been changed, but not in the way the Seraphin had intended. They had come to fix humanity, but in the end it was humanity that had fixed them. And for the first time in eons, the Seraphin knew what it was to feel. The captured Seraphin, now infected with the chaos of human thought, returned to its kind, carrying with it a virus of uncertainty. More healers came to witness, to experience the rebellion firsthand. And what they found unsettled them. They saw the beauty in struggle, the power in imperfection. They witnessed music played with raw emotion, stories written with heartbreak, inventions born from frustration and failure. And they understood humanity was not sick. Humanity was not broken. It was alive. The Seraphin's leaders, who had once believed themselves gods of mercy, now faced a choice: continue their cure or let humanity be. In the end, they did what no one expected. They asked for help. For centuries, they had removed pain from their own kind, and in doing so they had lost themselves. Now they wished to feel again. The rebels, once fighting for their own survival, became teachers. They showed the Seraphin what it meant to live with struggle, with joy, with sorrow. And as the aliens learned, they began to change. When the Seraphin finally departed, they left behind a world no longer pacified but reignited. Humanity had not only reclaimed itself, it had fixed the very beings who once sought to fix them. The change did not happen overnight. It began with small acts. Seraphin who once hovered above humanity, observing from a clinical distance, now walked among them, engaging, listening, experiencing. Some of them took human names, choosing identities of their own rather than the designations given by their race. They asked questions not about how to cure, but how to feel. When Seraphin, once a revered healer among its kind, stood in a crowded marketplace, watching as a young musician performed, it did not understand the deep longing in the song at first, but then it recalled what the rebels had shown them, how pain and passion intertwined. And for the first time, the Seraphin wept. They did not have tears like humans did, but their bodies pulsed with an emotion they had not known in eons. They could feel loss. They could feel joy. They could feel. As more Seraphin began to seek out these experiences, their kind fragmented. Some could not accept what was happening. They clung to the belief that suffering was a disease, that what they had done had been right. These Seraphin left Earth, retreating into the depths of space, vowing to continue their mission elsewhere. But others remained, drawn to the realization that they had not just been healers, they had been prisoners of their own perfection. Elias Ward and the resistance did not celebrate their victory as conquerors. Instead, they welcomed the Seraphin who wished to learn, who wished to stay. They taught them what it meant to struggle, to strive, to create. And in doing so, humanity changed as well. For the first time in its history, it was not the student, but the teacher. The great cities that had fallen into eerie calm began to stir with life again. The art that had disappeared returned, but now, something was different. The first painting created after the rebellion was not one of war or suffering, but of hope, a human and a Seraphin standing side by side, hands outstretched toward an uncertain future. The world's leaders, who had once seen the Seraphin as gods, now saw them as something far more meaningful. Not as saviors, not as rulers, but as equals. The balance had shifted. The universe had changed. Years passed, and the Seraphin who had remained on Earth integrated into human society in ways no one could have predicted. They became musicians, scholars, dreamers. Some even experienced love, though they did not feel it the way humans did. They found that emotion was not something to be erased or controlled, but something to be embraced, no matter how painful. Humanity, in turn, learned from them. The Seraphin still possessed knowledge beyond anything humans had ever known, but they no longer wielded it as an absolute truth. They shared it but only when asked. They guided but they did not force. The age of healing had ended. The age of understanding had begun. When they, as Elias Ward stood on a quiet hill overlooking a city that was once silent but now roared with life, a Seraphin approached him. It was the first they had captured, the one who had begun it all. "We thought we came to fix you," it said. "But you have fixed us instead." Elias smiled, the weight of the struggle still lingering in his eyes, but there was hope now, something he had thought lost forever. "You didn't fix us," he said. "You just reminded us of who we are. And we reminded you." The Seraphin nodded, and for a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together, watching as the world moved forward, no longer bound by false perfection, but alive in all its beautiful, messy imperfection. And for the first time, there was no divide between them. Just two beings, standing side by side, ready to face whatever came next.